Salam salam, inshallah everyone is doing well. Another visit from the library. Wanted to talk to you about my experience reading the Shakespeare canon. So before I jump into my experience and I jump into sort of some high-level lessons that I think are important, I wanted to show you how the kind of books that I read. At the time of the recording, these are the things that I have. I was able to purchase this summer this very beautiful 8-volume Folio Society set of the collected works of Shakespeare. I might have sort of shown you guys this before on some posts on Instagram. So there's one box, and I have a second box for the 8 volumes. This is actually what I ended up reading the most in. Originally, my idea was to go to my local used bookstore and just get these like thin volumes because I travel a lot and I thought it would be easier. This is actually the way I prefer to read, but I was not able to find all the plays actually. So the famous ones, Taming of the Shrew, Othello, King John. I have like 3 volumes of copies of King John. The Merchant of Venice, The Tempest, obviously Macbeth, The Midsummer Night's Dreams. But these Dover thrift editions are beautiful because they're super thin and you can just, you can carry them throughout the day. If you have a big pocket or overcoat, you can wear them. But I was not successful, alas, with that. Of course, in America, I'm recording this in Cairo right now. In the United States, I have the New York limited edition copy of Shakespeare, which is my favorite copy of Shakespeare because that was Shelby Foote's favorite copy of Shakespeare. And I was actually put onto that by all of my reading and watching interviews by Shelby Foote, but that's too valuable to travel with and the volumes are too big. And then I have this nice, simple volume of Shakespeare's poems. I think there are about 3 poems, Venus and Adonis, The Rape of Lucrece, and I think there's 2 poems, and then this one has, and I think The Lover's Complaint, The Passionate Pilgrim, and A Lover's Complaint, so 4 poems. I still haven't read the poems. I'm saving this for Thanksgiving break because the poems are actually not this also volume has the sonnets, but I thought that I could read the poetry over Thanksgiving. And I also have this very lovely the sonnets. This is actually a very beautiful volume of his sonnets. And when I first read the sonnets, this is the actual edition that I read. It comes in a nice slipcase, and I got this from the used bookstore for like $5, so that was amazing. Okay, so it took a little bit of effort to find the right books. I prefer, like I said, the single volumes, but I wasn't able to do that. So that meant that I had to do a lot of reading on my desk or like on a couch. I couldn't easily travel with these like folio, volumes. They're pretty thick. Each one is about 400 to 500 pages, and the book is heavy, and it doesn't like necessarily open that easy. And it's such an expensive volume, you don't want to mess it up. Why Shakespeare? I mean, everything that we owe to expression in the English language essentially comes from Shakespeare. I mean, that was my conclusion when I read his canon. Of course, many of the plays I've read in high school and in college, some of the famous passages, To Be or Not to Be, I memorized. I actually acted in Shakespeare when I was in high school in a couple of plays, attended many performances of Shakespeare. So Shakespeare, if you grow up in the West or if you grow up speaking the English language, it's impossible not to brush up against Shakespeare. But when I read, especially the lesser known works, I mean, the expressions, I was so shocked of how many English expressions are taken from Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, even though there's English literature before Shakespeare, like Geoffrey Chaucer and others, his English is still, I find, approachable. There are some challenges, without doubt. There is a vocabulary issue, some of the sentence structures, which is I'll get to that in a minute, but it's still largely approachable. And because of that, I think it's very, very important to see the master. He is like the master author in the English language. And, Shelby Foote called him the grand master, teacher. He said a writer can always learn something by reading Shakespeare. And that's exactly how I felt. It took me about a few months because I had to stop in the middle for different things. But I really felt I learned about expression. I learned about how to articulate oneself, about how to talk about the human psyche, the human experience. Especially the tragic figures in the plays are very captive. A very captivating plot and the way the character sketches are put together. It's a pure pleasure to read. There's another thing, though, that's important, which is about the language of Shakespeare, and that some people find it difficult. And that's a problem, because if we find somebody like Shakespeare difficult, he was in the 1500s, which is like the day before yesterday in the span of human history, then that means that we lose a lot of language. If we can't read stuff like that in the English language, then that means we lose our ability to speak and to articulate, and clear speaking and clear articulation is a part of clear thinking. So that's why it's also important. Shakespeare, the King James Bible, and the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, those are the three main pieces of English writing that come around the same period. Of course, the King James Bible and the Anglican Book of Prayer before Shakespeare, they actually influenced Shakespeare. But those three are very important to see and to taste how English is supposed to sound, high English. Of course, alhamdulillah, I read the King James Bible when I was in college, I think almost in its entirety. I have not read, unfortunately, the Book of Prayer. I have it. I have I'm not an original copy, but I have the text of the original copy. And I plan to get into that as well. Which segues into another topic, which is how we talk about Islam. When I read the books of the Islamic sciences, the books that you see behind you, that's what I spend most of my time reading, studying, and teaching. That Arabic sounds like the English of Shakespeare. In other words, even that Arabic today, if I were to come to, if a modern Arab were to read those books, who understood Arabic but doesn't really have a training in the Islamic sciences, they're not going to understand those books either. So we have the same problem in Arabic or in Islamic studies. And therefore, if we want to translate the meanings and the first principles of Islam from the original Arabic, whether the Revelation, the Quran and the Sunnah, or the classical period, the books written about it, the vast majority written in the Arabic language. Of course, there's Persian, Turkish, Ottoman, Urdu literature, but largely in Arabic. Then the vehicle of Shakespeare is going to be the vehicle that we need to, get in to be able to carry those meanings across. And I've also noticed that a lot of things that are translated by Muslims from Arabic to English actually are not that good. And I say this as a translator. I mean, translation is a very difficult task, and it's very hard to have a good translation, but a lot of it's just not good. I used to think because it's the lack of understanding of the Arabic, but now I'm starting to, after I read Shakespeare, I think it's the lack of the experience of how to articulate in the English language. So I benefited tremendously from reading Shakespeare, whether it's just the enjoyment of reading about these characters and these plots, or the joy of just hearing the English language. A lot of it is just almost poetic. It's like music when you read a lot of the soliloquies or the speeches and the famous ones in the different, especially in the histories, where they're very long passages. The plays are not as good as the famous plays, but some of those passages are, they're like, it's almost like you could put it to music, you could put it to a beat. There was the pleasure of that. There was the pleasure of discovering how many expressions we owe to Shakespeare. And then there was also the deeper, the inner meaning of some of his plays. I was reading some of Martin Ling's, Sheikh Abu Bakr Sirajuddin Rahimahullah's book on Shakespeare. I didn't read it all, I read about half the book. But he chooses like 7 or 8 key plays, and he talks about sort of the inner dimension of those plays, and seeing those inner dimension from the lens of a practicing Muslim and Sufi was important for me also, because that's kind of my background as well. But that's not as important as the other things that I'm mentioning to you. And then largely the importance of how we come to communicate the high principles, the first principles of our faith tradition into the English language. I highly recommend that you don't have to do all of Shakespeare the way I did. I felt it's embarrassing that I speak the English language most of the time and teach in English, and I haven't read all of Shakespeare. I had maybe read about a third of the canon, and I kind of felt that's wrong. It's like being an American and not having read the Constitution. I mean, at least once you've had to read the Constitution. So it was one of those things where I'm going to do it. This summer was when I decided to do it, and I'm grateful that I did, and I actually look forward to reading some of these plays. Some of the history plays I'm probably not going to read. Maybe in a decade I'll read them again, but definitely the high plays, like the 8 or 9 or 10 key plays, definitely I plan to read again. And it's not next to me right now, but I have a little booklet. The last thing I'll say, it's kind of half the size of my phone, of the sonnets, and that I now carry everywhere I go. And anytime I'm about to engage in something in writing, I like to just glance in it to sort of get the mind working about the correct way of phrasing things. I'm recording this right now at the eve of the US elections. I actually debated if I even should do this now. It's Monday and tomorrow, Tuesday's elections. But that's part of the problem with the rhetoric that we have is it's just the speech is not correct. The language that people use to communicate is not correct, which indicates that there is incoherence in the way that they are thinking. What I got from Shakespeare is a very clear mind, a very clear way of being able to communicate. And if your primary language of input and output is the English language, you definitely need to familiarize yourself with that. Just a small visit. I hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.